Welcome to Regime Technologies. I am Venkat. This is part 16 of ASP.NET video series. In this session, we'll learn about adding items to the drop-down list control at design time using the HTML. We'll also learn about adding items to the drop-down list control at runtime using the code. Let's flip to Visual Studio. Let's drag and drop the drop-down list control from the toolbox. Now remember that whenever we want to present to the user a list of choices from which we want the user to select only one choice, then we choose drop-down list. We can also use radio button list for that purpose, but then the problem with the radio button list is that as the number of choices grow, the amount of space that the radio button list occupies will also grow. We will talk about radio button list in a later video session. Okay, so if you have a lot many choices to present to the user from which you want that user to select only one choice, then drop down list is the control that we can make use of. Now if you look at this, I just dragged and dropped a drop down list control. It doesn't have any items within that, so obviously when I run this page now, the drop down list will be empty when the page renders, as you can see it here. So we need to add items that we want to display within this drop down list control, and to add those items you can do that at design time, okay, at compile time. So how do I do that at design time? Right click on the drop down list, select properties. Within the properties window, there is this items collection property. Now one golden point to always keep in mind is that drop-down list is a collection of list item objects. We will talk about list item objects in just a bit, okay? But at this point, just keep in mind drop-down list is a collection of list item objects. So when I click this ellipsis button next to this items property, so it's a collection. So when I click this ellipsis button, you see this list item collection editor. So a drop down list is a collection of list item objects, and this is a list item collection editor. You can add a list item here. So when I click add, look at this. These are the properties of the list item objects that we commonly use. The text is the text that gets displayed in the drop-down list, and the value is usually the one that gets stored in the database. For example, if you display a list of cities within the drop-down list, you have city name which appears as a text in that drop-down list. Okay, for example, like Sydney, Mumbai, New York, etc. Now when I select a city within the drop-down list and then maybe submit that form, in the database, instead of saving the city name, it will actually store the city ID, okay, the integer. So if you have a different value than the text, then use the value that will be behind the drop-down list. Okay, and you can retrieve that value using the selected value property of the drop-down list. We will talk about retrieving the selected values in a later video session. This session is all about adding items to the drop-down list at design time and at runtime. Okay, so obviously I want to set the text. Let's say text is male and the value is 1. Okay, and then I want to add female is the text, and the value is 2. Okay, so let's click OK. So now if you look at this list item collection editor window, I've got 2 list items. Okay, now I can move them up or down using these arrows, just in case if I have added them in the wrong order, you can move them up and down using these arrows here. Okay, so now click OK. Now when I run my application, as you might expect, it shows both these list items within the drop-down list, male, female. Now if you actually flip to the source mode, look at that. The list item collection editor window, when you added items there, it actually generated this HTML for us. So the values are here, and this is the text. You can either include it between the opening and closing braces, angular brackets of this list item, or you can actually use the text property. So text is equal to male. So you can do this as well. Okay, and if you flip to the design, you should see male, the same as before, but then I'm using this text attribute here instead of just wrapping that text between this opening and closing tag of list item object. Okay, so this list item, if you look at this, the way it looks right now, it shows male and female. Male is the first option in the drop-down list, so it appears as if it is selected. Now let's say when this drop-down list renders, I want the female list item to be selected in the drop down list. How do we do that? This list item has got another property called selected. So if you set that to true, then when the drop down list renders, that list item within that drop down list will be selected. Here we set the selected property to true for female. So if you look at this drop down, it has set that to selected. Okay, so there is another property called enable. And if you look at this, for a drop down list, if you set the enabled property to false, that means you're technically disabling that, which means that option will not be shown in the drop down list. So if we run this now, only male option will be shown because you have disabled female list item by just setting enabled equal to false. So these are the commonly used properties of the list item object, but then the drop down list itself is a collection of list item objects. So we have seen how to add list items at the design time. You can do that in the HTML directly, or you can use the list item collection editor window from the properties. Okay, this window that we have used. Okay, but then you can also add items to the drop down list at runtime using code. So when the page actually renders, I want to add items to this drop down list. Is that possible? Absolutely. Okay, now keep in mind, drop down list is a collection of list item objects. So obviously if I have to add items to the drop down list using code, then I have to create an instance of list item object and then populate all the properties that are required, at least the text and value properties, and then add that list item object to the items collection property of this drop down list. It's as simple as that. Let's see how to do that. So let's say when the page loads, I want to do that. So we know that drop down list is a collection of list item objects. So list item, let's call this male list item, is equal to new list item object. And if you look at the constructor, there are several overloaded constructors of list item class. This is one constructor which is taking text and value. So the text that I want to add is male and the value is 1. So that's one list item object. So let's create another list item object for female. So let's call this female list item, and let's say female, and obviously the value for that is going to be 2. Okay, and the reason why you have this red squiggly line here is because the text and value, both of them should be strings. So wrap them in double quotes and everything should work. Okay, cool. So we have the two list item objects that we want to add to the drop down list. So you have just created those objects. So obviously you need to add them to the drop down list. So the ID of the drop down list is drop down list 1. That's the drop down list to which I want to add these items. So select that. Dot. It has got an items collection. Remember, this drop down list is a collection of list item objects. So how do you get to that collection property? Using the items property. So items dot add. So to the items collection, you want to add a list item object. Look at the add method. The IntelliSense says it expects a list item object. So we need to pass these list item objects one at a time to the add method. Okay, so we passed male list item. Now I need to pass in the female list item. Okay, so now when we run this, we are actually adding these list items, at runtime during the page load. And remember, look at this, when you have to be extremely careful when you add list item objects on the page load event. Okay, the reason is, look at this, let's say let's flip to the design mode. Look at this, at the design time, I don't know what items are going to come into this drop down list because they are determined at the runtime. They're calculated at runtime, and we are doing that in the page load event. So let me just put a button control there. Let's run this page now, and as the page loads, because in the page load event we are actually adding those list items, so the drop down list shows those male and female list items within the drop down list. Now look at this, we are doing that within the page load. Now when I click this button, the page load event will be fired again, right? So it's going to add male and female again. Okay, now we know that web works on a stateless protocol. So how is it remembering them? Because ASP.NET View controls makes use of the view state. So the view state has actually remembered the previous values within this drop-down list. And when you click the button, the page load event gets fired on the web server again, and then another set of male and female is added. So every time you click this button, these male and female list item objects keep adding to this drop down list, and we don't want that to happen. So if you don't want that to happen, then add these items only if it is the first initial get request of the web form. And how do we determine that? Using if not is postback property. Okay, so now if we run this, no matter how many times you click the button, it only loads it the first time the web form loads. That's why you will not have that duplication. So no matter how many times you click this button, you only have them once. So be cautious when you add list item objects to the drop down list on page load event. Okay, so drop-down list is a collection of list item objects which we have talked about. The list items can be added to the drop-down list at the design time or at the run time. If you want a specific list item to be selected in the drop-down list, set the selected property of the list item object to true. To hide a list item in the drop-down list, set the enabled property to false. Now remember, not only drop-down list, the controls like checkbox list, radio button list, all the list controls, checkbox list, radio button list, you can see them here, checkbox list, radio button list, bulleted list, list box, all these list item objects are actually collection of list item objects. So if you know how to add items to a drop-down list, then it's very easy to understand adding items to these controls, because it's essentially the same. You are adding list item objects. Okay, but then one thing that is a little different is this enabled property. If it's a radio button list, this enabled property, if you set that to false, then that choice within the radio button will be disabled, in the sense you cannot select or unselect that. Okay, but for a drop down list it will be hidden altogether. Okay, so to hide a list item in the drop-down list, set the enabled property to false. If you are adding list item objects to the drop-down list in the page load event, make sure you do only when the page is loaded for the first time. Otherwise, every time you post the page back, for example by clicking a button, the list items will be added again and again, causing duplication. On this slide, you can find resources for ASP.NET, C# and SQL Server interview questions. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.